Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might brighten your day. The glass shattered against the marble floor, and silence swept across the grand ballroom. Hundreds of guests froze, their champagne glasses hovering midair, their conversations dying in their throats. At the center of it all stood Ryan Voss, the billionaire everyone admired, his face pale, his hand trembling as he stared at the black-and-white ultrasound photo his wife had just laid before him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers ignited like wildfire. And across the room, Katie, the woman who had once been his entire world, walked away with tears glistening in her eyes, her dignity unbroken, her secret revealed at last. This was the night that shattered a marriage, the night pride destroyed love, and the night that would send a powerful man on a desperate search to reclaim the family he thought he had lost forever. The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 frozen stars, casting their golden light across the grand ballroom of the Voss estate. Outside, snow swirled down in elegant spirals, but inside, warmth, laughter, and champagne filled the air. It was Christmas Eve, the event of the season, and everyone who mattered in New York's high society had gathered under the vaulted ceilings of Ryan Voss's mansion. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos clustered near the bar, exchanging talk of mergers and markets. Women in gowns that shimmered like jewels floated across the marble floors, their laughter mixing with the string quartet playing carols near the staircase. Waiters in white gloves moved gracefully, balancing trays of sparkling wine and hors d'oeuvres. At the center of it all was Ryan Voss. Tall, broad-shouldered, every inch the untouchable billionaire CEO. Ryan carried himself with a kind of practiced ease that made others instinctively step aside when he passed. His dark hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp, his eyes, those calculating gray eyes, seemed to miss nothing. Yet tonight, there was something colder in his gaze, as if the season's cheer couldn't thaw whatever storm lived inside him. By his side, or rather a step behind, stood Katie. She wore a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk. Not extravagant, not dripping in diamonds like the other wives at the party, but something about her presence turned heads anyway. Her beauty wasn't loud. It was quiet, luminous, the kind that made you look twice. Those who knew her whispered about her beginnings. Once a hotel maid, she had caught Ryan's attention during a fateful encounter years ago. Against every prediction, against his mother's relentless disapproval, she had become Mrs. Voss. But the whispers tonight were different. She doesn't fit in, one woman muttered behind a jeweled fan. Look at her, still acts like she doesn't belong here. Another said, eyes flicking toward Katie with thinly veiled disdain. Katie heard every word, though she kept her smile soft. She had learned to hide her hurt behind grace. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she held a small velvet box tucked carefully against her palm. Inside was a secret, a gift that she had planned to give Ryan tonight, something that could change everything. But the moment never came. Helena Voss entered the room with the commanding presence of a queen. Dressed in deep emerald velvet and pearls that seemed older than the house itself, Ryan's mother didn't just walk, she owned the space. Conversations quieted when she approached. Helena's sharp eyes landed on Katie, and the faintest curl of her lips told the truth, disdain wrapped in a smile. "My dear," Helena said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "you've done well not to trip on those heels tonight. I suppose progress comes slowly." Polite laughter rippled among those close enough to catch the jab. Katie's cheeks warmed, but she lowered her gaze, whispering, "Merry Christmas, Helena." Ryan should have defended her. He should have wrapped an arm around his wife and silenced the cruelty with just one look. But he didn't. Instead, he lifted his glass, smirking faintly as though he, too, found humor in the insult. And then came the moment that froze the room. "Tell me, Katie," Ryan said, his voice smooth but edged with steel, When you speak to these people, do you ever realize how out of place you sound? The words sliced through the air like glass shattering. Conversations halted. The string quartet faltered mid-song. Dozens of eyes turned toward the couple. Katie blinked, unable to process what he had just said. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ryan's gray eyes locked on her, hard and unyielding. "Sometimes," he continued, his tone dripping with contempt, "I wonder how I ended up with a wife who doesn't understand the world she's living in." Gasps echoed around the room. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The humiliation was sharp, deliberate, and public. Katie's throat tightened. Her fingers curled tighter around the velvet box in her hand. Inside, the surprise she had kept close to her heart suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Helena's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. To her, this was vindication. Katie forced herself to stand tall, though her knees felt weak. She whispered only one word, "Ryan," but it was swallowed by the silence pressing in from every direction. Ryan didn't answer. He turned away, already engaging in conversation with another guest, as though nothing had happened. And Katie stood in the middle of that glittering ballroom, the small velvet box trembling in her grasp. Her heart breaking, while the chandeliers above continued to sparkle mercilessly. Long before the glittering chandeliers and the champagne-soaked applause of society, there was a boy standing alone in the silent hallways of a mansion too large for comfort. Ryan Voss had grown up in wealth, but not in warmth. His father, a stern, brilliant financier, died when Ryan was barely 10 years old. The funeral had been broadcast in the papers, a parade of black cars and polished speeches. Yet what stayed with Ryan wasn't the ceremony. It was the way his mother, Helena, stood stone-faced beside the casket, her gloved hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You're a man now, men don't cry." But he did cry, alone in his room beneath sheets embroidered with the family crest. He pressed his face into the pillow so no one would hear. The house echoed with servants, lawyers, and business associates, but never with laughter. From that day forward, Ryan learned to bury his feelings beneath steel and silence. Years blurred together. Tutors came and went. Boarding schools taught him discipline, strategy, survival. By the time he was 21, Ryan had inherited more than a fortune. He had inherited an empire and a heart barricaded against tenderness. It wasn't until one night, in a hotel far from New York, that everything began to change. Ryan had been traveling for business, staying in a 5-star hotel downtown. He remembered being restless, unable to sleep, pacing the suite with his tie loosened and a glass of scotch half-empty on the table. That's when the door creaked open. A young woman in a maid's uniform stepped inside, humming softly, her eyes fixed on the cleaning cart she pushed. She froze the moment she saw him. "Oh," she gasped, dropping a stack of fresh towels. I thought this room was empty. I'm so sorry, sir." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Do I look invisible to you?" His tone was sharper than he intended, a reflex from years of being on guard. The girl flushed crimson, kneeling quickly to pick up the towels. "No, sir, I just didn't expect." Something about the way her hands trembled caught his attention. She wasn't clumsy, she was nervous. Ryan studied her. Chestnut hair tied back in a simple braid, eyes that seemed too honest for this world. Her name tag read Katie. "Leave it," he said suddenly, watching her fumble. "I'll call the front desk if I need anything." Katie paused, her fingers clutching the towels. She swallowed, then whispered, "Most people don't mind a little help." The words were small, almost shy, but they struck him like a challenge. Nobody ever dared speak to him like that. Ryan tilted his head. "And you think I'm like most people?" Katie hesitated, then met his gaze. "No, you look like someone who hasn't slept in days." For a moment, Ryan forgot to breathe. No one, not his board of directors, not his polished circle of acquaintances, had ever looked at him and seen exhaustion instead of power. Their conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but something lingered. The next night, Ryan found himself waiting in the lobby just to see if she'd pass by with her cleaning cart again. She did, and when she saw him, she smiled nervously as if they shared some secret. Soon, it became routine. A stolen exchange in the hallway, a brief conversation at the end of her shift. He learned that Katie worked double hours to pay for her younger brother's school fees. He learned she carried a small notebook in her pocket where she wrote little poems during breaks. One evening, when Ryan asked, "Why poetry?" she answered, "Because it turns pain into something beautiful, and I think we all need a little beauty to survive." For the first time in years, Ryan felt something crack open inside him. It wasn't grand gestures at first, it was simple things. Ryan leaving a coffee for her at the front desk. Katie reminding him that the world was more than boardrooms and bottom lines. They walked once after her shift through a quiet park lit by street lamps. Snowflakes drifted down. She laughed when one landed on his nose. He had never realized how much he missed laughter until that moment, but happiness rarely arrives without shadows. When Helena discovered who her son was spending time with, her fury was swift. A maid, Helena's voice cut through the quiet of the Voss dining room one winter night. "Ryan, do you know what this will do to your reputation, to our name?" Ryan set down his glass, jaw tightening. "Her name is Katie." Helena's lips curled. "Katie, a girl who scrubs floors and makes beds for a living? Don't be absurd. You have responsibilities to this family, to your shareholders. Do you think they'll respect a man who marries beneath him?" Ryan's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. For the first time in his life, he wanted to shout, to defend someone. But the weight of his mother's expectations pressed hard against his chest. Later, when Katie noticed his distraction, she touched his arm gently. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated, staring at her kind eyes. "Nothing I can't handle." But in truth, he was already torn between the love that softened his heart and the iron chains of a legacy he could never fully escape. And so the hidden wounds of Ryan Voss began to bleed again, threatening to undo everything Katie had unknowingly begun to heal. Katie had always imagined that the moment she discovered she was carrying Ryan's child would be the happiest of her life. She had woken early one December morning, pale winter light spilling through the curtains of their penthouse. The test lay trembling in her hand, the 2 lines clear as day. For a moment, she pressed her free palm against her stomach, tears springing to her eyes. "You're here," she whispered in her heart. "You're mine, you're ours." She thought of how Ryan would react, the surprise in his sharp gray eyes, the way his carefully guarded expression might finally melt into joy. She imagined him holding her close, his lips against her hair, whispering, "We'll raise this child together." But the reality was different. Ryan had been drifting further away with each passing week. Business trips stretched longer, dinners were missed, and when he was home, his mind was elsewhere. He came in late, smelling of cigars and expensive cologne, and though Katie longed to tell him, she couldn't bring herself to speak the words. Not yet. Not when his phone buzzed with calls from men whose names she didn't know, not when Helena's voice lingered in his ears like poison. One evening, Katie overheard Helena in the sitting room. She had arrived home earlier than usual and stopped outside the door, her hand tightening around the velvet box she still hadn't given Ryan. "She doesn't belong here, Ryan." Helena's voice was sharp as crystal. "She may be carrying your name, but she'll never carry your world. Everyone sees it. They laugh behind your back." Ryan's reply was low, strained. "Enough, mother." But Helena pressed on. "You have responsibilities, investors, allies, a reputation to uphold. Isabella Grant is back from Europe. She's refined, she's respected, and she still remembers the boy you were before Katie sank her claws into you." And Katie's breath caught, The velvet box nearly slipped from her fingers. Isabella Grant. The name tasted bitter, even unspoken. Katie turned away, pressing her back against the wall, fighting the burn of tears. In the quiet of their bedroom later that night, Katie sat at her vanity, the small box resting in her lap. Inside was a pair of cufflinks she had ordered months ago, engraved with a simple phrase, "Forever Us." She had planned to pair the gift with the news of her pregnancy, imagining the joy on his face. But when Ryan finally entered, loosening his tie, his eyes were distant. "Long day," he muttered, reaching for the decanter on the dresser. She almost said it then. Almost whispered, "Ryan, I'm pregnant," but something in his expression stopped her. It was the look of a man already halfway gone, trapped between loyalty to her and the pull of another world. So Katie smiled faintly, slid the box back into the drawer, and whispered instead, "I saved dinner for you." The following week, they attended a charity gala hosted by one of Ryan's closest associates. The ballroom glittered with lights and diamonds, the air humming with conversation. Katie held Ryan's arm, her gown a soft shade of sapphire that brought out the warmth of her eyes, yet she felt invisible. Ryan's attention wandered constantly. He shook hands, exchanged promises, his laughter sounding hollow to her ears. Then came the moment. A guest complimented Katie's dress, saying, "She looks radiant tonight." Ryan smiled too quickly, too carelessly, and replied, "Yes, radiant," though Isabella would have chosen something less modest. She always had impeccable taste. The words dropped like ice into Katie's chest. She froze, her lips parting in disbelief. Around them a few guests exchanged glances. Some smiled politely, pretending not to notice. But Katie noticed. Every syllable seared into her like a blade. "Isabella, again." Katie excused herself, her voice barely steady. "I need some air." Ryan turned, frowning. "Katie," but she was already gone, her heels clicking against the marble as she fled toward the balcony, the winter air biting her skin. That night, after the gala, Katie sat alone in the study. The house was silent, Ryan asleep in the master bedroom. She opened her leather-bound journal, the one she had kept since she was a teenager, and began to write. December 14th. I never thought love could feel this lonely. He's here, but not here. Every time Helena whispers, I lose a piece of him. Every time Isabella's name is mentioned, I feel myself fading. But I cannot fade. Not now. Not when I carry our child. She paused, pressing her hand against her belly, then continued. If Ryan cannot stand by me, I will stand alone. This baby will know love even if I must protect it with everything I have. I will not let anyone steal that from me. Not Helena, not Isabella, not even Ryan's doubt. Tears blurred the ink, but she didn't stop writing. The words were her armor, her vow. The house was still, but inside Katie's heart, storms gathered. She had no way of knowing that the greatest storm was yet to come, one that would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and survival. The night of the Christmas gala arrived with a kind of splendor that could make even cynics believe in magic. Snow drifted lazily across the Manhattan skyline, glittering under the street lamps. Inside the Voss estate, the ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland. Silver garlands wound up the marble columns, crystal ornaments shimmered like icicles from the chandeliers, and an enormous Christmas tree towered near the staircase, its branches heavy with golden lights. Guests flowed in like waves of perfume and polished shoes. The city's elite, dressed in gowns worth fortunes, mingled beneath the chandelier glow, sipping champagne and exchanging the season's empty pleasantries. Every detail screamed opulence. Katie stood at the top of the staircase for a moment, steadying her breath. Her gown was a simple white silk, flowing and luminous, chosen not to compete with the extravagance of others, but to hold a quiet dignity. She placed one hand briefly on her stomach, invisible beneath the fabric, and whispered to herself, "Tonight. I'll tell him tonight." In her clutch was the small velvet box inside the first ultrasound photo, a secret of new life she had guarded fiercely. This would be her gift to Ryan, the moment she hoped would bring them back together. From across the room, Helena spotted her immediately. Dressed in emerald again, her presence was as sharp and unyielding as ever. She leaned toward a cluster of guests and said in a voice that carried just enough to be overheard, "She looks like a ghost pretending to be a queen." The group chuckled softly, trying to mask their discomfort with polite laughter. Katie heard it. She always heard it, but she lifted her chin higher, her steps graceful as she descended the stairs. "Mrs. Voss," one guest greeted kindly, a man old enough to be her father. "You look radiant tonight." Katie smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Merry Christmas." But the warmth was short-lived. Ryan appeared near the bar, already on his second drink. His shoulders looked tense, his tie loosened more than usual, and his laugh sounded rehearsed. Helena lingered beside him like a shadow, whispering into his ear. Katie felt the distance before he even saw her. When Ryan finally turned toward her, his eyes swept over her gown. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't the smile of a man seeing his wife. It was the smile of a host acknowledging another guest. She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You look tired." "I'm fine," he said quickly, then took another sip of his drink. "Just a long night." Before she could answer, Helena interrupted. "Ryan, darling, Isabella Grant is here. She's been asking about you." The name made Katie's pulse quicken. She turned slightly and saw Isabella, stunning, confident, wrapped in a sapphire gown that clung like it was made for her alone. Isabella smiled, a knowing, almost pitying smile, before drifting into conversation with others. Katie forced herself to remain calm. "Not tonight. Don't let them take tonight from you." But fate was merciless. Later, when the crowd gathered near the tree for a toast, Ryan raised his glass. His voice carried smooth but unsteady from the alcohol. "To family, to friends, and to the women who make us better men." Applause followed. Then, out of nowhere, he added with a wry laugh, "Some women have elegance, refinement. Like Isabella, she always had a way of lighting up a room. Others, well, others do their best." The words hung heavy, each one sharp as a blade. A hush fell. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Helena smirked into her glass. Katie's heart clenched so hard it hurt to breathe. She whispered, almost to herself, "You didn't just say that." Ryan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Don't be so sensitive, Katie. It was just a joke." A joke. Katie felt the tears burning, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Helena. Not in front of Isabella. Slowly, with deliberate grace, she stepped forward. Every eye in the room followed her. She reached into her clutch, pulled out the small velvet box, and set it gently on the polished mahogany table in front of Ryan. "For you," she said softly, her voice steady though her soul trembled. Ryan frowned, confused. He opened the box, and inside, beneath the golden light of the chandeliers, lay the black-and-white ultrasound photo. The room seemed to stop breathing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She's pregnant." Another guest covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Ryan's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. He stared at the image as if it were a foreign language he couldn't read. His lips parted, but no sound came. Helena's face drained of color, her composure cracking for the first time in years. Isabella turned her head, hiding a flicker of embarrassment. Katie met Ryan's stunned gaze. Her own eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice remained calm. "This was supposed to be our Christmas miracle, Ryan, but maybe it's just my goodbye." With that, she turned. Her heels clicked against the marble as she walked through the crowd. Guests stepped aside, silent, watching her go. Some had tears in their eyes. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Katie's vision blurred as she reached the doors, but she never faltered. She walked out with the same dignity she had carried since the day she first entered Ryan's world. And Ryan stood frozen in the middle of the glittering ballroom, holding the ultrasound photo with trembling hands, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than the music that had fallen silent. The ballroom had gone silent that night, but the silence that followed Katie's departure was far louder. It echoed through every corner of Ryan's life. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Katie never came back. At first, Ryan thought she was hiding, that eventually she'd return once her anger cooled. But when he walked into their penthouse bedroom and saw the empty drawers, the missing suitcases, and the bare space where her jewelry box once sat, the truth hit him like a wrecking ball. She hadn't just left the party, she had erased herself from his world. And she had taken his child with her. Business deals began to slip through his fingers. He sat through board meetings with vacant eyes, his thoughts consumed by the ultrasound photo he carried everywhere. Investors whispered. Partners grew restless. Some said he was distracted. Others said he was losing his edge, but Ryan didn't care. He fired his publicist, ignored his lawyers, and spent fortunes hiring private investigators. Every lead, every rumor, every fragment of information about Katie became his obsession. Money isn't the problem, Ryan told his head investigator one night, his voice hoarse from whiskey and sleeplessness. He pressed the ultrasound photo flat on the desk between them. "Find them, I don't care what it costs." The investigator, a grizzled man named Maxwell Hayes, studied him quietly. "Mr. Voss, women who leave this clean, they usually don't want to be found." Ryan's eyes, bloodshot and desperate, locked on his. "Then you're not hearing me. I don't care what she wants. She's my wife. That's my child. Bring them home." The first lead took him to Chicago, a hospital record, a Jane Doe check-in 2 days after Katie vanished. Ryan flew there overnight, his heart pounding. He bribed administrators, combed through patient files, even lingered in the hospital cafeteria, imagining Katie's voice among the crowd. But the trail went cold. Next came Denver. A neighbor claimed to have seen a young woman who matched Katie's description walking with a small child near a bakery. Ryan parked outside that bakery for hours, watching families go in and out, his hand trembling around his phone each time a woman with chestnut hair appeared. None of them were her. California followed. A motel clerk swore he remembered a woman with green eyes checking in under a false name, a baby in her arms. Ryan scoured every room, pressed money into the clerk's palm, demanded details. But by then, months had passed. Katie was always 3 steps ahead, leaving only shadows in her wake. Back in New York, Ryan's penthouse became a tomb. The laughter of parties was replaced by silence. He stopped turning on the lights, choosing instead to sit by the window overlooking the city. Every night, he pulled the ultrasound photo from his wallet, running his thumb over the grainy image. "You should have been born here," he whispered once, staring at the skyline. "You should have known your father's arms, not the emptiness I gave you." Some nights, he drank until dawn. Others, he lay awake, replaying Katie's voice in his mind, her laughter in the park, the softness of her touch. The cruel irony was clear. The very walls he had built to protect himself from love had destroyed the only love that had ever mattered. While Ryan spiraled, Katie's world was nothing like the glittering one she had left behind. She lived in a modest apartment above a bakery in Denver, where the smell of fresh bread greeted her every morning. Her days were filled with work, waiting tables, cleaning houses, anything that kept a roof over their heads. Her son, Ethan, grew with each season. A child with Ryan's eyes, gray, intense, thoughtful even when he was only a toddler. Sometimes, when Katie looked into those eyes, she felt her heart twist. Ethan didn't know the man whose face he carried. One evening, as Katie tucked him into bed, Ethan asked, "Mama, why don't I have a daddy?" Her throat tightened. She brushed his hair back gently. "You do," she whispered. "He just lives far away." Ethan frowned. "Does he love me?" Tears stung her eyes, but she forced a smile. "More than anything." When Ethan drifted to sleep, Katie sat at the table and wrote in her journal, "I left because I had to protect him." Ryan's world is cold, ruthless, full of people who see love as weakness. Ethan deserves laughter, not power plays. Safety, not suspicion. I can't let Ryan's shadows touch him. Not yet. Not until Ryan learns what it means to love without pride. Ryan, miles away, was writing too, notes scrawled in margins of contracts, on scraps of paper left across his office. "I'm sorry. Come back. I'll change. I'll be the man you believed in." But Katie never saw those words. Years rolled by like waves crashing against rocks. Ryan lost pieces of his empire, burned bridges, and traded fortune for rumors. And through it all, he remained haunted by the same photograph, the same question, the same wound. "Where are you, Katie? Where are you, my son?" The search had not destroyed him completely, not yet, but it had stripped him bare, turning the once arrogant billionaire into a man driven by nothing but love, regret, and a desperate hope that one day, somehow, he would find the family he had lost. Snow drifted gently through the Christmas market, the kind that clung to coats and hair like delicate lace. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon, while carolers sang under a canopy of twinkling lights. Families moved through the stalls, children tugging their parents toward hot chocolate stands and toy booths. Katie held Ethan's hand tightly as they walked between the crowds. He was almost 4 now, his cheeks rosy from the cold, his gray eyes, Ryan's eyes, wide with wonder at the glittering lights above. "Look, Mama." Ethan pointed excitedly at a man dressed as Santa, handing out candy canes. His little laugh rang out, innocent and pure. Katie smiled, though her heart ached. Every year, Christmas carried both joy and sorrow. She had promised herself never to look back, never to let the past unravel the life she had built for her son. But fate had its own plans, because standing just yards away, frozen in place, was Ryan Voss. He had been watching the crowd, searching without even knowing what he hoped to find when his gaze landed on the boy. The child looked up at Katie with familiar eyes, eyes he saw every night in his dreams. His breath caught, his heart stopped, and then Ethan spotted him. The boy tilted his head curiously, then grinned. "Daddy!" he shouted with the fearless joy only children possess. Katie froze. The words sliced through her like lightning. She turned, and her eyes found Ryan, older, thinner, worn by years of regret. His suit was plain, his posture weighed down, but his gaze burned with the same intensity she had once fallen in love with. Her chest heaved as Ethan wriggled free from her grasp and ran straight into Ryan's arms. Ryan dropped to his knees on the snowy ground, catching the boy against his chest. Tears sprang to his eyes the moment he felt the small heartbeat thudding against him. He pressed his lips against Ethan's hair and whispered, voice breaking, "My son, I've finally found you." Katie's throat closed, she could barely breathe. Ryan stood slowly, Ethan perched against his shoulder. His voice trembled as he faced Katie. "I lost everything," he said, not caring that strangers were staring. "The company, the money, the respect. I gave it all away chasing shadows, chasing you, and I'd lose it 1,000 times more if it meant having this moment." Katie shook her head, tears pooling. "You don't know what you did to me, Ryan, to us. Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep, holding Ethan, wondering if he'd grow up without ever knowing love?" Ryan's voice cracked. "I know I destroyed what we had. I let pride and poison blind me. But Katie, I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second." The crowd gave them space, sensing the gravity of what unfolded. Snow fell between them like blessings from a sky too merciful to turn away. Katie's hands trembled as she stepped closer, her eyes darting between Ryan and their son. She wanted to reach out to close the distance. But the memory of that night, his cruel words in front of hundreds of people, still burned like a scar. "You broke me," she whispered. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, and when I needed you the most, you chose them, your mother, your pride over me." Ryan's eyes filled. I know, and I can't undo it, but I can spend the rest of my life proving I'm not that man anymore. Ethan tugged on Katie's coat then, his small voice piercing the silence. Mama, I want Daddy at home. Please. Katie's breath hitched. Ethan looked at her with the innocence of a child who only knew love, not betrayal. And in that moment, she realized her forgiveness wasn't just about Ryan. It was about giving Ethan the family he deserved. Weeks passed, and Ryan showed her, not with grand speeches, but with actions. He sold off the remnants of his empire, walking away from boardrooms and power. Instead, he opened a foundation in Katie's name, dedicated to supporting single mothers and children abandoned by privilege. This isn't about charity, Ryan told her one evening as they walked past the foundation's new building. It's about redemption, about building something good, something that lasts. Because of you? Katie listened, her heart torn between doubt and the unmistakable truth in his voice. Slowly, cautiously, she began to believe. That December, for the first time in years, Katie, Ryan, and Ethan decorated a Christmas tree together. The apartment was warm with laughter and the smell of pine. Ethan squealed as Ryan lifted him onto his shoulders to place the star on top. Katie stood back, watching them, her hand over her heart. Ryan turned, his eyes meeting hers. No words were needed. His expression said everything: gratitude, love, and a silent vow never to fail her again. Katie exhaled softly. She hadn't forgiven him entirely. The wound would always remain, but she could see the man he had become, the man Ethan needed, and the man she had once believed he could be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As carolers sang outside and the snow fell gently against the windows, the Voss family stood together at last. Not perfect, not unbroken, but together. A new beginning, lit by Christmas lights and hope. I want to leave you with this thought. Pride can build walls so high that even love cannot climb them. I have learned, through this story, that no fortune, no title, no public image is worth more than the simple truth of respect and kindness in a family. When we lose those we love, often it isn't because of one single mistake, but because of the words we didn't take back, the moments we let pride speak louder than compassion. And once broken, trust takes a lifetime to rebuild. So I ask you, how many times have we let anger or ego rob us of peace? And how many times could a gentle word or one act of humility have changed the ending of our own story? Remember, forgiveness does not erase the past, but it can open the door to a better future. Love without respect is fragile, but love with humility can survive any storm. If you find this story meaningful and want to help us share these important values, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Together, we can build a strong community full of potential and a spirit of justice.